Hi folks, I'm going to make a quick video, hopefully quick, about these Vermeer F and G series balers. I had posted a few tips and some info about them on an antique tractor forum I follow, and I got 2 private messages in the last few days asking for some more details or help on other people's problems, mainly to do with core starting. So I thought for both them and maybe for anyone else who's interested, I'd post a video showing some tips and info of them. 2 things to mention right off the hop. I apologize. I got out here with only this crappy cell phone, no GoPro, so I don't have a good way to take a video, and I realize the cell phone makes a squealy noise when I take a video, but that's okay. There's probably only 2 people who are ever going to watch this video. Second thing, although I say Vermeer F and G series, this is very obviously and patently a Massey 1440. That's because back in the 80s, Massey didn't make their own balers, they rebadged Vermeers. The 1440 was a rebadged 504G, the 1450 was a rebadged 504F. Anything I say in these videos applies to all F and G series. Massey rebadged the 605 F and G as I think the F was the 1560 and the G was the 1550. Here in Canada, especially this part of Ontario, there are not a lot of Vermeer dealers, so the Massey versions are more common for these balers. They're getting old, early 80s, but at the time they came out, they were, in my opinion, the best balers made. They were some of the first open-throat balers, open-throat belt balers. When these first came out, Deere, for instance, was still making the 410 and 510 closed-throat nightmare balers, so they soon changed to the 30 series. These will make a very tight bale, as tight as any new twine tie baler to this day. There are a few nuances and peculiarities about using these old balers, which I'll go through in a little bit here. The difference between the F and G series, they were made concurrently. They were identical in all ways, except the G series had dual spring tensioning, whereas the F series has single spring. I think it was a single spring, although with a dual spring option, but single spring nominally with a hydraulic tensioning. The F didn't necessarily make a tighter bale, it was just that it was more controllable with that hydraulic tension, whereas this G with a 2 springs made a consistently very tight bale. For me, sometimes even too tight. Yeah, if thick hay or thick alfalfa, this will make a bale sometimes too tight to easily drive a bale spear into. This is a pretty rough example of one. This is here at our southern farm where I don't do a lot of hay or anything down here. This farm here is where I keep all my it's all scrap equipment, not good enough for anything else that we have fun with. The previous owner was going to send to the scrapyard about 8 or 9 years ago. I bought it for scrap price, cobbled it together, and seems to be working surprisingly okay. Now the main thing I get asked about, or what I've posted and what those 2 messages in the last couple of days were about, is starting the core for these balers. These balers got a mostly undeserved bad reputation for being hard to start a core rolling. They'd plug or spit the core out, and most of that is undeserved. As long as they're adjusted right, they will start a core just fine. In fact, better than many other of the balers available at that time, because the F and G series were Vermeer's first open-throat balers and some of the first open-throat balers on the market in general. But getting into the core starting problems, because that's what most people want to know about. The biggest issue is, pardon me, this adjustment here for the real height, or not for the real height, as you'll see shortly. Folks would get these and use them on tractors with different drawbar heights, and to get the tooth to ground clearance right, they'd bungle with this adjustment here. That adjustment will adjust the real height kind of that way. It's got a little bit of spring float, but you're not meant to adjust that to get the clearance to the ground correct. So that adjustment is strictly to get the clearance between this teeth and the starter flaps right. And I'm going to go over to the other side and roll it over so you can see where it kind of should be. That clearance should be maintained at 1 inch. You want the starter flaps on there. Anyone who says to take the flaps, don't listen to them. You want them on there and in their closest position. This is actually a little far now that I look at it. Maybe not. In their closest position, you want about 1 inch clearance between those teeth and starter flaps. This might actually be a little bit close now that I look at that. So keep that adjusted correct. You want that nice and tight, not too much less than 1 inch, but certainly not more than 1 inch between the tips of those teeth and those flaps when they're is rotated to their closest position. That's one of the key things to make these bales start the core rolling successfully. Another thing is making sure you have a full complement of good teeth. The teeth on this baler are very much part of the bale forming operation. They force it in here and start this side of the core rolling down, whereas that roll at the bottom starts it rolling back, and then it comes up over the belts and they start it rolling up, and this starter roll with the flaps flops it back down. So the teeth are very much part of that core starting operation, and you need a full set of teeth, and ideally good stiff teeth. When they got weak over time, when these ones are probably weakened as a bit of a slop, they probably from the factory were further ahead like that, and now they're a little worn back and loose. When they get a little worn and sprung back, they don't aggressively force that core to start rolling. Now, a lot of guys online will say, oh, make sure you have good new teeth on there, but if you're like me and you're cheap and you don't want to spend any money on a crappy, well, it's not crappy actually, but an old baler you got for scrap price, you don't want to be replacing the teeth if they are all fine and just a little bit weak. There's a way you can mitigate that then to some degree. On the later F and G series and the Super Gs, the cam track that those teeth follow, they have with those cam followers, the cam track the cam will follow that will cause them to come down, pick up, rotate around, and then swing back as they get up here. It was bolted through 3 bolts at fixed positions where my finger is there, and there. On later F and G series, it was 4 bolts and it was slotted just like I've made these ones, and you could advance the cam track, which delays the time the teeth relax backwards. It keeps them pointed aggressively into the chamber for a little longer. So in this one that didn't nominally come like that, I drilled some holes and then used an angle grinder to slot out those. It's a little bit of a pain because this cam track, you can't get it out of there without disassembling the reel, which I didn't want to do. So I undid the nuts when they were at the home position, drilled some holes where they are there, used an angle grinder to score as much as I could between the 2 holes, and peeled and chiseled those pieces out of there and slotted it to advance that cam track. And that helps those teeth, especially when they get worn or old, more aggressively start that core forming. So there's another tip to help keep your core forming well when those teeth get ugly or get worn. Let's go back to this side here and look at another aspect of core forming. One of the problems you'll see with any of these F and G series balers is operators have bungled with too many adjustments. So when they put it on a tractor with a different drawbar height, they bungled with this adjustment to try and get the clearance to the ground right. That got the clearance for between teeth and flaps incorrect. So then they take off the flaps because the flaps were causing it to wrap around the flaps or kick out the core, and then that would cause other wrapping issues on the bottom roller. So they'd cut out the wind guard. This should have a wind guard up here as well as this bottom one. The previous owner of this one had cut that out evidently, and then that would cut off the place where it's supposed to attach there and adjust that wind guard position. And by the time they were all done bungling with everything, every one of these balers is out of adjustment. I'm going to stop the video here for a second. Sorry folks, I had to pause the video there for a second. Neighbor came by and wanted to see the baby I had sleeping. I was talking about aspects to improve the core starting on this baler, and I started talking about this wind guard, how operators cut off the upper wind guard to be able to cut it off, and all the other adjustments they'd often bungled with. The previous owner of this one had cut off the upper wind guard, and when you see a lot of these balers online for sale, I've seen one at auction that all have the same thing cut off. When they cut off that upper wind guard, depending on where they cut it off, they also cut off with the attachment point for this hook here, which is what holds it in the right position and limits this wind guard from traveling too far up. That's another critical aspect for starting the core here. This wind guard needs to be limited to not travel above the teeth. It needs to keep the hay down in that tooth zone. You can imagine if that wind guard were just left free flopping, if you got a big slug in there, it would lift up and then the hay would just get over top and into this roll, which rolls this way and kick back out and cause a nightmare. So whether you have the full wind guard or not, make sure you've got some sort of stop and adjustment limiter to keep the wind guard holding hay down in that tooth zone. Mine's not really adjusted exactly where it should be. Because the original attachment leg was cut off, I just welded this piece of round bar and a washer on the far side in something approximating the right position. But there's another aspect to help with core starting. Make sure that wind guard is adjusted right. The belts are another factor that significantly help or can hurt, depending on what you have in core starting. These balers originally came out in the early 80s with smooth belts, but soon after, Vermeer switched the spec to MRT belts. MRT stands for micro rough top or mini rough top. I can't remember. Either way, it's a slightly rough textured surface that really helps core starting. So make sure your belts are good, the same length, same thing as all other round balers. And if you're getting new belts, go for that MRT belt. I have the belt configuration here set up how they originally came, with 5 belts, 2 10-inch and 3 4-inch in the middle there. I have that because this set of belts was on clearance when I got the baler from a supplier, and they were dirt cheap, and this was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I just ordered them to see what would happen if I could get this baler working. Vermeer offered, and you can get or spec, depending on where you get your belts from, a different belt setup, and I rather wish I'd done that now. Instead of 5 belts with the 3 narrow ones in the center, you can get or change to 4 wide belts. I think it's 4 10-inch belts. It might be 4 8-inch belts. You have to adjust some of your belt guide positions on here and on the gate, but the wider belts, the narrow belts, you have less chance of them turning and twisting. Not that that should happen if everything's set up and aligned right, but it also reduces that gap between belts, so you're less likely to have any leaf loss in your legume crops. You're still going to have less leaf loss in any round baler than, say, a square baler, but you do notice in this baler, compared to, say, others that are, or the newer John Deere baler with the wide belt, you do notice a lot more leaves falling out. So I really wish I'd done that. I'd recommend the wide belt setup if you're getting new belts. One more aspect that can help with core starting, and this is not unique to Vermeer balers. This is quite popular on John Deere balers and some aspects of the New Holland balers with their ridiculous sludge roll design. People do the same thing. This starter roll down there, it originally had these round bars welded to it to give it a little bit of traction to force that hay in and up the core up into the belts when they're down and tight. You can weld some additional bars onto there to make it a bit more aggressive. I've used, I thought it was 3/8, but it actually looks like 5/16 square bar. Very quickly and dirtily tacked onto there, and doing that significantly helps. And it's something that's popular on a lot of balers with your starting roll or your sledge roll on New Holland balers. Let's talk about some aspects of these balers to watch out for. Common for the cylinder mounts to crack down there. I noticed this last year when I was in a rush to do third cut, that they had cracked back through there and up front, and I just needed to get going, so I grabbed a crappy little generator and a crappy little 10 volt flux core welder I happened to have in the barn, and some flat bar I carved up, and crudely and dirtily bubblegum welded that together to stitch that crack up. And I always intended to come back and add a gusset up here and clean that up and do a better job. In the event, I completely forgot about that until right now when I'm making this video. So it'll have to last at least today until I can get it better, but I don't think I'm going to have any problems there. The springs, like any long extension spring, occasionally you might get the end break off here. Vermeer offered a thread and plug. This one has one. It's essentially just a plug you can thread into the springs if the end breaks off, and put an eye bolt in there. It's got internal threads to capture itself on the last few coils, and then you can have a spring repair, and apparently it's a lot stronger than the original hook at the end. There's no Vermeer dealers around this part of Canada, Ontario, as I mentioned, and even when I called Vermeer dealers, they had a hard time looking up that repair plug. But on the Massey parts books, if you look up the Massey parts books on the AGCO Parts Book website for these balers, they actually show that plug in the 1450 parts book, not in the 1440, but in the 1450, which uses the same springs, so only one of them, they show that repair plug as an option, and it was still available from Massey as of a couple of years ago. So I bought myself a couple of spare plugs in case any of these springs break. Vermeer, something Vermeer has been and is still very good at with their new, even up to their R series balers, is doing more with less horsepower. And these balers back in the 80s were no exception. There were a lot of smaller 4 and 5 foot round balers that could operate with lower horsepower, but very few were as heavily built as these Vermeers. Normally you got to the more heavily built balers and they required more horsepower. Vermeer is good at doing more with less horsepower, and one thing you can change if you're using a lower horsepower tractor, this drive sprocket here, this main drive sprocket from the gear shaft was originally a 13-tooth sprocket with just a plain keyed bore. If you're running with less horsepower, say 40 horsepower or less, you can drop the tooth count on that, go from a 13 down to a 12 or 11. It slows down the baler a little bit, but it still bales just fine. But that way your tractor is still operating in its peak RPM range for the engine, and you can get by every tooth count lower you go. Saves you 5 or 6 horsepower. You can run this down to 35-ish horsepower. These balers are quite low. I did that. I went from a 13 to a 12-tooth sprocket my first couple of years in trials with this baler, when for one reason or another I was running it with an old Case 530, 40 horsepower with a tired engine. Now that I'm using a 65 horse Alice 180, which is far more than this baler needs, especially on our fairly flat land at this farm, it doesn't even feel this baler back here, and I don't need to go to the smaller sprocket. So I've actually done the opposite. I've gone from the 13 to a 14-tooth sprocket. What that does is that it spins the baler up to full speed when the tractor is running at a little lower RPM. So it saves a little fuel on the tractor. It still doesn't fuel. It saves a little noise. Your tractor is just running a little bit lower RPM. It's nicer to use. So something to keep in mind. You can play around with that sprocket a bit. What else can we talk about on this baler? Usually center collar bearings for the all rolls. Won't get into the details and the debates of those versus the hex style, John Deere style. The pickup bands, for those who are familiar with other newer balers, it's a common upgrade to get aftermarket poly pickup bands, plastic bands. You hit a rock or a bump with a plastic and it just bumps out of the way and then it bumps right back down to the original dimensions, versus the original steel bands most balers come with, which get bent up and then they scrub against the teeth or the bars and something cuts through something else. For these old girls, no one's making aftermarket poly bands, but you can see I have poly bands for the last 4 over there. What I do that I thought was rather clever, this is what you call Chanix, or Chanix is a proprietary name, a few companies make it, but it's a UHMW channel meant to run roller chain, and I think this particular profile is for number 80 roller chain. We use it a lot at work, and I can buy it from our industrial store at work. It's UHMW, so a very high-wearing polyethylene. It's probably never going to wear through in my lifetime there. I buy pieces of it, cut them to the right length, and I heat them carefully and gently, bit by bit, over a barbecue and bend them into that U shape, and they make a very nice high-wearing pickup channel, whatever you want to call it, for these balers. And the dimensions are pretty much perfect to match the original profile of the steel channels. I did put, if you can see, steel cap plates on each of them to kind of tie those 2 bolts together, and so there was less chance of the bolts pulling out, and so far so good. I thought that was a rather clever and good trick for these guys. I like these balers, and I really like Vermeer. They're really good at doing novel things with their balers. I think their new series, like their R series, and really anything after the I series and later, are superb new style balers. I think they're pretty much just as good as anyone else, but I might have a slight preference to Deere balers, but I really have a lot of respect for Vermeer, really willing to try new things. And that was true back when these balers were made. But one thing I really don't like is the chintzy tie mechanism on these. 3 options for the twine tie mechanism were available, but they all use this arm that swung in from the side. There's a manual rope pull tie, which I've got rigged up here. There was a hydraulic tie option, essentially just a small cylinder with a needle proportional valve to adjust the speed. You used one of your remotes to tie, or an electric linear actuator option. In the shop over there somewhere, I've got components I bought off Amazon to convert this to electric linear actuator. And what I did was I bought some voltage adapters to bump up from 12 to 18 volts and some potentiometers and rocker switches, such that I could have 2 speeds, forward and reverse, and bumped up to 18 volts and really overspeed it to run one direction fast and then come back across slow. In the event, I bought that stuff 2 years ago and only got part way to soldering it all together because most of the hay at this farm I sell. And although round bales were popular, the bale I sold the most a few years ago, now most folks are asking for squares. So I only actually use this baler for a few dozen round bales a year at this farm. And for a few dozen bales a year, I can pull a rope. It's not a big deal. The knife mechanism, everything has to pivot just right. Halfway through the series, I had a serial number break and improved that, but it's still a pretty chintzy mechanism. The later Vermeer and the John Deeres, where they had that arm that swung through the center, from the center pivot point, was much better. For some reason, New Holland, up until very recently, and possibly even the newest balers, still had a similar drop-down one-sided pivot twine arm. I have no idea why. Probably an unpopular opinion, but in all my experience with round balers, I think New Holland is probably one of the worst ones. They rode their 1970s reputation of great haying equipment far too long. Anyway, that was just a sidebar. I mentioned the previous owner had cut that upper wind guard off, and not only did they cut off the piece that limits this wind guard for in its travel, but that upper wind guard adds some weight to kind of weigh these bars down and keep that hay in that tooth zone. So I just crudely welded an angle iron over there with a heavy, looks like 2" by 1.5 inch solid block of steel on there to add some more weight back to what it should be. What else can I say about these balers? I think I've covered all the critical aspects for anyone still using these F and G series balers. Again, this is a Massey version, Massey rebadged 504G, but anything I say here applies to both the F and G series. One more aspect I'll mention just while I happen to be here and looking at it. Lube fittings are fairly obvious. Get your manual. Do not ignore the lube fittings for the pickup cam down here. I haven't got it rotated to the right position, but on the early series like this, there were 4 pickup bars. Later ones had 5 pickup bars. Each one has, on this side, a grease fitting when you rotate it to the right spot for the pickup bar. It's a real pain to get at. They had this plate here with this hole in it. You're supposed to be able to access the grease fitting hole through, but it's much easier to undo that and take it off to access that. And on the other side, it's even more of a pain to access the same thing, because you go through this slot at the front here. When those bars are in the right position, there's a grease fitting. And it's a real pain to access when you have to turn rotate the baler to just the right position to access it. And one thing that's really irksome is that they don't align from side to side. Even before I adjusted that pickup cam or advanced it, you'd get it in the position for this side to grease, and it was just a little too far out for that side to grease. So they could have done a better job on making those easier to grease. You see a few of these balers, I've seen some at auctions that have the pickup cams and bars totally worn out, those bushings in there, because operators have clearly either ignored or not bothered or forgot about those grease fittings. So don't forget those. What else? This baler, I've got that crude, I just mounted that crude granular hay preservative applicator on there. Haven't got finished mounting it yet. I'm about to do that right now when I shut down this video. Don't forget to make sure these are greased. Your rolls that clip over the axles there to make it latch fully. You want to make sure that gate latches fully, or else it's going to pop open while you're running. Apparently a common problem on these balers. I've never had one. I've never had that problem. Well, one other aspect about horsepower requirements, Vermeer offered, and most of these balers have them, these kind of pie plate discs. They look like a convex pie plate with a bite out of them that sits over top of that main roll there. There's two reasons they had those as an option. One is because these old balers, they don't open up like later balers where the whole back end opens up. That's just, as you can see, just the top rolls open up when you open the gate. And sometimes the bales, especially if they're heavy or dense or heavy thatch or thick alfalfa or wet, will stick in the chamber there. Those pie plates, as it's rolling the bale, they kind of break the surface tension or surface friction of the bale running against the sides of the chamber there, so it's not pressing quite so heavily against that chamber, and it falls out of there much easier when you open the gate. Sometimes you'll still get a bale stick in there, and when it does that, just open the gate and engage the PTOs for a second. It'll kick that bale out when the gate's open. But another effect of those pie plates is they reduce the horsepower requirements by 5 to 10 horsepower because you don't have as much friction on the side of the chambers there. So if you're marginal on horsepower, make sure you have those pie plates in there. I think they're a good idea either way. Some people say they make the bale look more raggy looking. I've never found that. Bales out of this baler, if you know what you're doing, even though it's a little more tricky to run, once you get good at it, the bales out of this look as good as any other twine bale. I've seen compared these in the same field to bales from a Deere 435 and 467, and you wouldn't know the difference. They're all tight, square-shouldered bales. I think I'm going to end the video there. I thought there were some more aspects I had to mention. Maybe one more. The gearboxes on these saw an upgrade partway through the serial number series. I've got the earlier one, but apparently a little bit weak. Keep them full of oil. Make sure your slip clutch is working so you don't overpower it if you jam up the baler, you plug the baler. And apparently if you need a new gearbox, the gearboxes from a 5410 or 5400 or 5410 Rebel, all those Vermeer series, will fit that same input and output shaft type and location. You have to slot the mounting holes in the baler an 1/8 or 3/16 of an inch, but apparently that's a replacement if you ever need one of those. And I think that's it. Hopefully that helps at least the 2 people out who messaged me about this, and maybe someone else will see this video and might help them out if they're running one of these old girls.